Well, that is about it for tonight for us. We will go ahead and wait a second. I think somebody's here.
Who's there? Huh? Wait a second. What are you doing on the
Oh,
lawn?
it's
Sir, get down!
oh, oh man, that was rough. Um,
Yeah, it was.
oh, it just you probably couldn't tell
Well, you all
exactly
right
what was.
now?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
probably couldn't tell exactly what was happening there, but you'd never believe it. But there's actually this giant hole that's in the middle of my basement here. And so
Really?
that yeah, that's what was, I put it on my
Fell into
jacket
it.
earlier in the recording. Well, that's
Yeah.
actually because I guess there was some air coming from that, since it's really cold outside. And so I fell into it, and immediately I was in this graveyard. And so that's what you were hearing. You heard me probably yelling as I fell into the giant
Wow, that's
hole, and then we
crazy.
hit the ground. And then I was in this graveyard, and that's what all that fog, it was coming in from that hole. And so that's what allowed it to come in front of the screen. It's now cleared out. But man, it was really rough. It was bad. And there was this guy there who was also there, and he was yelling, "Get down." And then there was this figure with a mask over him, and he threw this object. This is the object here that was being thrown here. And so, um,
Yeah.
but luckily, I was able to dodge that object. And based on that, based on me being able to dodge that, I am totally fine. And so, I am glad to be able to report that even
Hey,
after that attack, um, I was able to find out that everything ended up working out just fine. So, not exactly sure what happened with Isaac, but I know that after that terrifying tale, I am probably going to go ahead and it seems as though we should probably stop filming for tonight. We will see you later
yeah, it says
on.
so.
Yeah, we will see you momentarily. We are about to begin the Civics Spectacular. So we'll see you then.
You're listening to the GWP Civics Spectacular. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined by co-host Jacob Fulmer and special guest Kirk Miller. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Miller.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So what all are we looking at today, Jake?
Today we're going to be looking at civics class, government today, and Missouri Boys State.
A lot of great stuff there, so let's get right into it. Civics class. So, Mr. Miller, of course, you're a civics teacher, and I was recently in your class, and Jake, of course, that's a class you've taken. You weren't in Mr. Miller's class, but that's something that, of course, we've both done. Any big takeaways from that?
Any takeaways from the class? Well, I have to
Yeah.
say it was one of my favorite classes.
One of
when
your favorites.
Took it a few years ago, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of things within the government. I learned like a lot of different laws that I didn't know that different states had.
I'd say the same. That was also one of my favorite classes, civics.
So I got to learn a lot from it. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are your favorite parts of teaching civics, Mr. Miller?
I think for me, my main objective for most of my students is what I see when they come on day one is a lot of kids. The way I've described it to people in the past has been they see government as like a big ball of twine. They see it as one thing.
Right.
yeah,
they don't see it as a strand of yellow and a strand of green that are together, sometimes working together, sometimes working against each other. So I think that's probably my biggest objective, is to pull those strands apart and show kids how government has many different levels, it has many different branches, it has different people doing different things, all working together and sometimes working against each other to protect democracy. So I think for me that's the biggest thing, is getting kids to disassemble what they see as a big conglomeration. You know, they don't see it as local government, state government, federal government. They don't see it as legislative, executive, and judicial. They just see it as one big ball.
Right, absolutely. So from local, state, federal, obviously a lot of important distinctions to know on the different levels of government. And of course there are a number of ways, I'd imagine, and I have certain insight into this because I was in your class last year. But are there any big things that you like to emphasize whenever you're covering this?
I think, teaching it in stages. One thing that's a little bit frustrating as far as our standards go, what we have to teach, and I don't know if we want to get into the whole EOC topic or not, but
sure.
Preparing kids for the EOC, there's a lot of things that I have to teach that I don't necessarily think are as important. If it was up to me, we would spend a lot more time on structure and function.
Right, and that's something we've actually discussed on this podcast previously in our education debate series. Some of the pitfalls that come along with standardized curriculum.
Yeah. One of the ones I would mention would be there's always several articles of Confederation questions on the EOC. And it's always been a head scratcher for me. Why do we need to spend so much time learning about something that failed?
Right.
The argument to that would be because of those failures, we were able to create the Constitution.
Right.
So I get that side of it too.
Sometimes you have to learn from mistakes that you make, and sometimes that's the best way to learn.
Right. But we don't use that.
Right.
So why are we dredging up those questions on the EOC? Why don't we ask more checks and balances questions? Or more, economics and government.
Maybe a larger emphasis on the one we actually use.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because checks and balances, of course, that's a major part of ensuring that separation of powers can take place.
Yeah.
And so definitely spending more time on that is a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think you can get enough structure,
Right.
And I think it's one of those, federalism especially, is a hard concept, a lot harder than what a lot of people realize for kids to grasp. It's just understanding that there are different levels of government that do different things. One level can do something and another level can't, and sometimes it gets muddled, and just not sure on that. But I think that's as far as the biggest hurdle for kids in my class, I think that's the hardest concept for them, is a good understanding of federalism.
Absolutely.
And levels of government.
Absolutely.
And how they affect us differently.
Yeah. As you mentioned, of course, that's something I discovered extensively throughout the year in the class, and something personally I recall talking about the different levels of government, a major thing. I don't know if you did when you were in civics, Jake. We actually had a local government day where we took a field trip to the courthouse, and you actually got to see some of that in action as far as how local government operates. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, I might play off of that. We there was 2 years ago we did a smaller scale version.
Right.
That's the one that I was a part of.
Yeah, which was good. We got a quick tour of the building and things, and so we thought we wanted to devote more time to that. Of course, our principal, Mr. Miner, is always on board with anything that is going to help, bring your subject to life for your kids. So that wasn't a problem.
Support on that.
Clerk Lee, Adrian Lee at the courthouse, did a great job.
She did.
Getting with everybody there in the offices, and we coordinated it out. And I felt like the highlight of the day was the jury selection process.
That was.
Where we took kids through. Judge Neil Quitno came in.
Yes,
and,
that was great.
Acted as our mock judge and did a great job of instruction. And the kids got to see, and we got a lot of good feedback about, because that's one of your civic duties. And I know Carrie Poe, who runs the courthouse uptown,
Right.
Was very happy to take the kids through it, because she mentioned to me she gets a lot of adults that come through that don't know that procedure. So we feel like we put the kids ahead of the game with knowing and understanding the importance of that. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I don't recall a lot of the details when you went, Jag. You said that it wasn't as extensive, maybe not as many speakers, a little bit of a tour, and done a little bit more. But from your experience with the past one, Jag, whenever you were in civics, would you say you would have liked to have gone on, say, one like the more recent one where you had more speakers, a bit more going on?
Yeah, and I think that was a really good idea to kind of incorporate. Did you guys do like half a day or a whole day?
We did a whole day.
A whole day, wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because I know
Instead of going into the offices came into the courthouse
Right.
and did presentations.
Oh,
And then
wow.
at the end, the kids got to do like a self-guided go wherever they wanted to.
Oh, okay,
Right.
wow.
Right, and then we got to take a tour all the way up to the very top, up inside the clock tower and sign.
They got to
at
do
the
that.
top.
Yeah, we did end up doing that. I think
Okay.
it was like 1 hour during the afternoon one day.
Yeah.
That would have been in 2023.
We shuffled the kids up for their hour, so
Right.
they only got about a 40-minute window, whereas this year we had the entire morning, and then we had lunch, and then went back for the self-guided in the afternoon.
Right. Absolutely. And of course, when we went up to the top of the clock tower at the courthouse, we got to sign our names up there. Jack, did you do that?
I don't think. I think what was about to happen. I think it was about to ring, and we were told to go down because.
Oh, you didn't get a sign?
Yeah, I don't think
I
so
see.
because I
I
think
know
it was
some
right
did.
about
I
to.
was gonna say I didn't see your signature up there.
Yeah, I felt like when your group went, we were just continuously strapped for time. I mean,
Yeah.
with the hour thing, it was a good. I mean,
It was
you
good
know,
to
we
see
were
somebody.
feeling our way through.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that every year it's going to get better. I mean,
Absolutely, you have to start
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, and so you guys are kind of the maiden voyage, so to speak. You guys were the guinea pigs,
Right.
and then you guys, and hopefully this year it'll even be a little better. So.
Right.
So was that the first year that was done? A couple
Yeah,
years
it just
ago?
was an idea that came to me. Just feeling like we needed to put more emphasis on local government. You know, here we go back to that dead horse of federalism again. You know, I talk in my class a lot to the kids about federal things don't affect you very often, but when they do, they're really important. They're big.
Right.
And it's important to
Local things
understand.
aren't as big,
Yeah.
but they're around you all the time.
Right.
So, you know,
Definitely
government is some of it.
Absolutely important to have.
And so, giving them some idea about what local government does, hopefully make things go smoother for everybody.
Right. Absolutely. Well, in any case, of course, that was just one of the many things that we covered in class, but that was a major takeaway from it was the local government field trip. And, well, Jake, thanks for being the guinea pig so that we could have the more extensive tour. So that was great. And, of course, as the speakers came through, they all came as the students sat in the courtrooms. That worked out nicely, I'd say. So,
Isaac, which of the speakers stood out to you?
the speakers? Probably the recorder of deeds.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff she said was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. That was really interesting. And having a family connection to real estate, that's something that my dad works with a lot.
Yeah.
And so I've always sort of been fascinated with deed restrictions and how that whole process works. If you recall that was what a couple of my questions were about.
Yeah. Some of the other kids weren't quite as interested. I think it might have been a little over their head. I think that happens.
Right. And there were a wide variety of questions. Of course, another one of the speakers there was the sheriff for our county, and I recall another one of the questions that I remember clearly is someone asked the sheriff just how fast his car could go. So that was interesting. And
Yeah, you get all levels of questions.
absolutely.
Back to the recorder of deeds. So
Yeah.
one of the things that jumped out at me was the commercial property taxes
Uh-huh.
in our county.
Right.
And I don't know if you're aware of this, but she informed us that they're 33%. So on commercial property, you're basically, if you have a building in Nevada, every third year it's like rebuying your building.
Right. It is.
It seems a little high to me.
Seems like a bit much.
33%. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
33.
I think ag was what, 12, and residential was like
Wow.
16, but commercial business personal property taxes, it really was eye-opening to me. I mean, I don't know that much about it, but 33% seemed high. I know Coach Pedalon always has a good job of putting things in a way that's easy to understand. He's like, yeah, that's like having to rebuy your building every third year.
Right. And Jake, you know that because you actually were in his class.
Yeah, and I think the classes combined, if I recall correctly, for
Right,
that
for the
hour
trip.
for that hour
Yeah,
trip.
yeah, we did the same
Uh-huh.
thing
Yeah.
with this year.
Right.
But that was really kind of eye-opening. 33% seemed really high. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. I mean, it
Yeah,
might be higher in
that
other
is.
places. I don't know, but
So
third,
that, like-
third of the value of your business.
So would that include like
Oh, wow.
small businesses on the square?
I think
Uh-huh.
so. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that
It was.
And that's your personal property. So that's like if you have a restaurant, that's every chair, every table.
Right.
You know, it's all
Right.
factored into
Everything.
that price and the value. So
Right.
based on the value.
yeah.
You know, so
And then you've got to think if you're making renovations to it, that's going to add value, but that's also going to add that price that you have to continue
Right.
to pay for it.
Right.
yeah. So that was kind of an eye-opening thing.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. I'd say so as well. So, of course, levels of government, that was a major concept covered in class, and of course, major one, branches of government, and a number of other different things. Anything else that you'd like to add to that, Mr. Miller? Any big
You know,
concept?
another one that makes me scratch my head every year
Uh-huh.
is that the Articles of Confederation was a specific
Right.
document, and the Constitution was another different specific
Uh-huh.
document, and the Declaration of Independence was another different specific document.
Right.
Which takes me back to that ball of twine.
Uh-huh.
You know, kids, when I get my hands on them at the beginning
Uh-huh.
of the year, they don't know that the Declaration of Independence was one thing, and I mean, a lot of them.
Right.
You guys probably did, not, but.
Right, but I can
that-
see how many people begin to lump those together.
I mean, you are aware enough from being in class,
Uh-huh.
some of the things that get said,
Right.
that, you know, it's a no-brainer that a student obviously doesn't understand the concept. I mean,
So they think they're all written on one like piece of
just,
paper.
they're all just kind of
the same thing.
Yeah, they're just kind of government, so.
Well, and I think some even think that we still use the Articles of Confederation,
Right.
which is clearly not the case either.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they don't
Uh-huh.
get that they're different documents. You know, breaking down the Constitution seems like a very rudimentary thing to do, but one of the lessons that we do is we go through the specific outline of the Constitution. We talk about, you know, that there's articles, there's sections, there's clauses. It's an outline, and only legislative stuff's in one article, and only. And hopefully you can chime in here.
Uh-huh.
That helps kids to break those branches
Yes.
apart, knowing that there's a specific article for this branch and there's another article for this branch. It's like the
Right.
chapters of a book.
Absolutely.
That's how I try to go about it. I don't
Uh-huh.
know.
It makes a lot more sense that way,
Yeah.
I'd say. Certainly.
Yeah, and I think isn't each branch of government like a different test too?
A unit, yeah.
Like a whole
Yeah,
unit,
we
yeah.
Right,
yeah.
a unit dedicated
Yeah,
to
so,
branches of government.
Yeah. We start out with, you know, background, and then we do foundations of government, a little bit about the colonies, and then get into like principles, you know, checks and balances, federalism, separation of powers, those things, and then, yeah, a unit over the legislative, a unit over executive, a unit over the judicial,
Uh-huh.
and then from there just some other smaller units to finish up specific things.
Absolutely. Well, very nice. That's just an overview of many of the main things that we covered in civics class and some of the main concepts. And as we said before, it's important to know these things because they have implications in daily life, whether you realize it or not. And so it's far easier to understand that if you actually have some level of understanding of the basic concepts. Now, of course, there are many examples of that as far as government today and current events and how exactly that all ties in. Jake, off the top of your head, are there any real great examples that you can think of, recent things that have happened that really kind of illustrate some of those concepts from civics class?
Let's see. So specific examples that I can think about.
Sure. If any come to mind.
Well, I would say some of the major decisions that we've seen recently from the Supreme Court, I would say that kind of ties into it, and understanding that
branches of government,
that it has to go, that there's different types of Supreme Courts, that like you have your state Supreme Court,
right,
and then it doesn't go all the way to the actual Supreme Court unless it has to.
Right.
And so I think that's something that's misunderstood, is that I think
That's
some people,
and that's federalism again.
yeah, it goes down
Absolutely.
There we
there.
go again. That's that concept rearing its head again of the different levels and the different courts and
right. Absolutely, of course, on the front of branches of government, of course, that being part of the judicial branch, and as you mentioned, Jake, there are many different levels, and of course, so ordinarily, of course, you're not going to start out with the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, so that, again, is something worth noting. Are there any other examples, either of you, that come to mind that illustrate some of these concepts?
The one that I see a lot is it's hard for people nowadays to track some of the stuff that goes on between the legislative branch and the president.
Right.
Like I think there's a lot of misrepresentation out there.
Right.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the media, and I don't want to go down that path.
Got it.
But I think sometimes the media does a pretty wily job of making things seem
Right, absolutely. Making it
different than
sound
what they really
scarier
are
than it
like.
actually is.
The Senate has discussed a bill.
Right.
Well, that's a long ways from the president's desk.
Right, and that's again where
Yeah.
things covered in civics class are worth knowing. Of course, the whole bill to law process is important to understand.
Yeah.
That when you hear this, and naturally because the media is looking for views, so they may make it sound scarier than what it actually is.
Yeah, the House has passed this bill.
Right. They're in the
That's good, but it still has to go through the Senate.
Right. It hasn't
Still a lot of
actually
steps,
been
yeah.
fully passed into law yet.
Yeah.
So,
Do you remember the analogy that we used in class for the bill to law process?
the analogy for the bill to law
Yeah,
process.
bills are like sea turtles.
Oh, bills are like sea turtles. Most of them died.
I always try to remember that when I see something on the national news that says the Congress did this, or another one that gets me is when the president says I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
It should really be I want to do this or I want to do this.
Right.
I
Don't
don't
get
have
ahead of
to-
yourself
yes,
now.
I have to
Yeah.
get Congress's approval first,
Yeah.
but they don't tell us that on TV.
Right.
That's something you have to know.
Right. Absolutely, and that is worth knowing. A great idea for remembering it is that those bills are like sea turtles, and that most of them die. There are a ton of different bills that are proposed, but not nearly as many of them that are actually passed into law. So, as you come across these things, hear these bills in the media, of course, remember that. Maybe it hasn't necessarily been passed into law yet, and chances are, if there isn't a great deal of approval or a great deal of support for it, it may not ever end up being passed into law. In fact, as we said with the sea turtle analogy, the odds are stacked against it. It's unlikely that it will.
Yeah. Which leads into the bills that we have today being very extravagant.
Right.
We get bits and pieces of what's on a bill.
Uh-huh.
And oftentimes there's a lot of other things
Right.
in there to bring so-and-so on board or
Right,
bring so-and-so to get votes. Sometimes you have to compromise a little bit to get
Absolutely.
things, and so there's a lot of that going on. My wife, she always likes to talk politics with me. She always makes the comment, bills should be one line, they should be one thing. That's it. And you know, that's kind of that's tough, but I see your point.
Right, and that doesn't necessarily tend to be the case. Certainly with recent bills, as you mentioned, they tend to cover a lot more in the bill. We saw recently with the big beautiful bill, they just covered a ton of things in it, for better or for worse.
Yeah, the big is there for a reason.
Right,
a lot of different stuff.
Right, quite a lot.
It's big because it has a lot.
Yeah, not just because of the spending, but because of the different ways that it was going to be spent for.
Yeah.
A lot of the changes that were made.
Right, absolutely. Any idea or any sort of philosophy as to why this is that so many of these tend to be bigger, include a lot in it? Is it just that, as you mentioned? You
I think it's essentially to get votes. I mean,
right, to get votes. This to appeal to these guys. This to appeal to these guys.
Throw a little Scooby snack here and a little Scooby snack there.
Right, absolutely.
You know,
and then make sure these people don't read the fine print here. And
I'm not enough of a politician,
right,
to know the ins and outs of that. But my guess would be that there's a lot of tabletop. And
right,
a lot of
absolutely.
stuff that I would be happy to vote for this bill if, you know.
Right, if it includes this, right.
Which leads into maybe something else we could talk about really quick.
What's that?
I don't know if you remember talking about all the things that a congressman has to weigh out. How being a congressman is way different than being a senator.
Right.
And how many different, you're being pulled in a lot of different ways.
Right.
When you're a U.S. representative, as per se a senator. When you're a senator, you're basically have the whole state. When you're a U.S. representative, you have an eighth of the state. You have a core group of people that vote you into office or not. But they're a very small group compared to what you have to do. You have to think about your people back home. You have to think about your state as a whole. You have to think about the country as a whole.
Right.
You know, sometimes maybe what's best for the United States isn't what's best for the people of District 4 in Missouri. You know, and so sometimes that little nugget that you get put into a bill can pacify your voters back home. Right. And so I think there's a lot of, you know, the Constitution was built on compromise, and I don't think we're going to hear the media use the word compromise with our politicians, because they don't like to talk about how they work together. Right. But I do think there's a lot of compromising. The result of that is a big bill, a lot of things. Just a philosophy. I don't know that for sure.
Right, and necessarily to get these things passed for enough approval in order for that to happen, that's necessarily going to require compromise, and of course that's sometimes seen as a negative thing. There are a couple meanings for the word compromise, and speaking in the context of, I won't compromise my morals. Of course, compromise in that context means corrupt, but of course, when you're speaking in terms of these agreements, that's a different use of that word, and that's sort of a degree of compromise. It's give and take, and ideally it should be mutually beneficial. They're an integral part in the bill to law process, among other things.
And also another thing I think we could probably talk about is the transparency of government now. It's more transparent than it's ever been.
Right.
With the internet, and it's all public record, you know.
Right.
And so, you know, I think what a big effect of that has been party power. I think it's really hard to go against your party now. I mean, it's because everybody knows. I mean, so I think party is as divided us more right now than ever. I feel that way. I don't know, because of that transparency, you know. Everybody's going to know if I voted out of my party. What do you guys think about that?
Right, there's certainly something to that, and something that we've actually seen a great deal of recently, sort of a real life implication of this, is there are certain people, it seems like certain people on either side of it are pushing for a sort of absolute transparency with government. You see like things with the Epstein files coming out, and just a bit later the JFK files, releasing those. And so there are a lot of different positions on that, but there are just one example where we see people pushing for more transparency, and as you mentioned with things like the internet, a lot more of that is readily available.
Yeah, and a lot of things with that little history lesson.
Right.
A lot of things changed with that, and with the Pentagon Papers.
Right.
The Pentagon Papers were essentially leaked out. They were, at that time censorship was still the law.
Right.
The Supreme Court had backed censorship by the government. None of the major media outlets could release anything about the government until the government saw it. And so the government was controlling what the people heard and saw about the government. And then, of course, the New York Times case, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Times, and the Pentagon Papers stood, and it's just kind of spiraled from there. Now, where do you want to get your news? I mean, like before the Pentagon Papers, before the Times case, you got your news from the government.
Right.
The government had control of the news. Now you get your news from the news, which is a company that's trying to, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, get followers, and that's how they make money.
Absolutely, looking for more views.
Sometimes media outlooks feel like that the best way to gain attention is to draw attention towards the bad things and not necessarily the positive things that are going on.
And generally that's true, that they'll get more views if they say more controversial things.
And that's an easy rabbit hole to get
yourself
drug into. I don't know that I want to do that in this podcast.
A lot of things going on there. And so on the front, as we were talking about, of transparency in government and the recent push we've seen for this, one of the things that we covered in class in terms of historical events relating to it is a big turning point where you started to see people push for more transparency in government was the Watergate scandal with Nixon. Do you care to talk about that a bit?
It's just, you can go back and talk to people that are still alive that were, 20-ish back then, and they'll tell you, that's when I started really losing trust in the government. The way they view the presidency changed after that. Everybody thought that the government was being true and honest, and now it's not.
Right. And suddenly people were more wary of it.
Yeah, there's instances from before that. 2 weeks before the U-2 plane got shot down, Eisenhower came on TV and said, "We're not flying planes over Russia." 2 weeks later, one of our planes gets shot down over Russia. So, it didn't just, Watergate was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
And there was a lot of other things going on at that time too. Right. But yeah, I think, I honestly think, and I teach that in class, that's kind of when people's overall
trust in the government
and just the way they view the president, changed with Nixon and Watergate.
Right. I'd imagine after something like that, and of course this is not something as if no one had ever seen anything like this before. There were other instances of it before. This was sort of the culmination of those.
Yeah, one example of that I can think of is the corrupt bargain from about 2 centuries ago. That was kind of an example of when in the early government there was corruption that was going on.
Yeah.
So.
Right. It certainly went on. Yes. And of course, that covers a great deal as far as we talked about the transparency in government. That was a big changing point in that. So there are a number of different points on that as far as just how transparent it should be. And of course
everybody has a different view of that.
Right.
I've actually pulled my kids in class before.
Right.
And where are you? Some people are like, well, I understand national security. I understand that.
Right.
If it's keeping me safe. I had a guest speaker a few years ago in my class, and he was a U.S. Air Marshal after 9/11.
Really?
And,
wow.
He talked about he mentioned from the 20. I'm trying to get my number right here. I think it was the 20 years after 9/11. For every one act of terrorism that happened, 16 of them got caught.
Right.
So like how safe we really were without even knowing how safe we were. Like,
right.
You know, your chances of pulling off an act of terrorism are 1 in 16. You know, which is too high. Don't get me wrong, but
right.
we don't hear about the other 15 guys that got caught before they were ever hurt anyone. So you know, that's the part of transparency that gets touchy.
Right.
You know,
right. Absolutely.
Are there things that I mean?
Right. Absolutely. It's important to have a balance there.
I mean, if President Obama would have announced the day before that he was going to assassinate Bin Laden, he probably wouldn't have pulled it off. I mean, so
right. Absolutely. Because while a lot of those details now would be good to know, at the same time, many of these details might be sensitive, and if they were pushed out to civilians, say other countries might catch wind of that, and that could potentially
how much are we entitled
dangerous. And I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts on that are. But of course, you got to have a balance. You won't see me arguing for absolute transparency. Yes, a lot of these things would be really nice to know, but at the same time, I accept that many of these things probably are for our safety, that we don't necessarily need to know. Jake, what are your thoughts on that? Absolute transparency, or
well, I think transparency
none at all, somewhere in between,
can sometimes lead to, people finding a way to generate their own stories.
Sure.
And I think that's what we see. Like one of the examples of that was the Hollywood sign being on fire.
Right, absolutely. Remember that earlier this year when the wildfires were going on in California. It was in the Southern California area, somewhat close to Hollywood. And I was actually there recently, and good news, the Hollywood sign is still there. It wasn't damaged, but at the time of these wildfires, there were images circulating of the Hollywood sign on fire. And the funny thing about these images, as we covered previously on this podcast, if you didn't catch it, you might want to check that out. That's in our Artificial Intelligence series, whole playlist dedicated to it. But long story short, these images with the Hollywood sign on fire, if you look closely at them, Hollywood wasn't actually spelled correctly. There's something a little bit fishy about this. I believe it was an extra D after Hollywood.
I think, it wasn't even really a letter. It was like a combination of the letter O and D, like merged together.
Right, very artificial looking. And as you could have guessed, that was actually an image generated by artificial intelligence. Well, it was fairly new at the time, but... And so as you could have guessed with those images, they were generated by artificial intelligence. The Hollywood sign was not actually burning. It was fairly close to those fires, those wildfires that were raging at the time in Southern California, but they weren't that close. And I can tell you personally, having actually seen it and been there, the Hollywood sign is still there, and it's doing just fine. Looks the same as it ever did. And of course, as we mentioned in our artificial intelligence series, kind of on a side note, that is a growing concern as artificial intelligence advances. It's becoming more and more convincing, more and more realistic. You saw it with images like this. You've seen certain deep fakes that can be done, stealing a person's name, image, likeness, things like that, using it for identity theft, even as we talked about previously, using it for things like scam calls. Well, scam calls certainly aren't a new thing. They've been going on for a while, and that's certainly a real thing, but one has to ask, with artificial intelligence, are those going to become more convincing? I'd say it's likely that they are. And of course we were talking about civics class. Well, artificial intelligence has even wormed its way into the classroom, it seems, for better or for worse. Something I've certainly seen. And Mr. Miller, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence?
In the classroom?
Yes.
I think the name says it all.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want my intelligence to be artificial.
It isn't necessarily beneficial. And it's interesting, of course, we've covered that at length, and not only artificial intelligence, but its implications in the classroom, and whether folks like it or not, it seems to have wormed its way in there.
I think it has its place. I mean, I think if I'm planning a vacation, it's great.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if I'm writing
I've heard people using it for planning vacations. I've never actually used it for that. Was it useful? Yeah. Very nice. And I've certainly, for example, taken a couple of English classes, a couple of AP English classes the past couple of years, And that was a real issue in class where people would try to write their papers using artificial intelligence, and at that point they were called out in class, said, oh, I expect better, you clearly wrote that paper using artificial intelligence. But now we have models that we've talked about more recently, like Claude, where you can actually program your writing style into it. Again, you're making it more convincing, easier potentially for academic dishonesty, for students to use it and fly under the radar where it still sounds like them. So
yeah, I think if I was an English teacher,
right, a real concern anywhere you.
Yeah, I think I would really consider pencil and paper, writing in front of me.
Right, and it's
we're not going to write a 5-page paper. We're going to write a 1-page handwritten paper, and I'm going to watch you write it because I want to see what you know. I don't
right.
know.
And that's something, even with some of the writing and different assignments that are done in civics, I'm sure you've seen it recently, not just even prior to artificial intelligence, just with the proliferation of the internet and having more wide access to information. As far as when people are actually writing things, they have to have the resource on the internet, and that's something also that we covered in English classes I've taken. Many people just don't know how to write without using a source, something like this, and so I think that that's an important skill that's oftentimes neglected is just sustained writing, not reading something from an article on the computer or using AI to write it, but just pulling out a notebook and actually writing things out, things like that really do require skill. And
my take on that has just been I've kind of morphed myself.
Right.
You know, I feel like for someone who's been teaching for 34 years, I'm always trying to stay ahead of the game.
Right.
To make sure my kids are learning. And so, I mean, if I went back and looked at my class, I know that there's a lot more collaboration now, and less and more discussion, and more. My questions are worded in a way where, you know, you have to know what you're doing in order to be able to answer. My tests, you know, you have to know the material to be able to answer them.
Right.
I think you would attest to that.
Right. Absolutely.
I think it would be hard. I try to find mentally challenging assignments that show me what you know, not what you can look up.
Right.
You know, I mean.
Right, absolutely.
So I try to hear
I think
my
oftentimes those are the ones that you learn most from.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would
certainly.
There's no way around this. There's no way around this. In the end, I'm going to have to know it to be successful.
Right. Naturally, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, of course, because you have to have some background knowledge. Actually know the things that were covered in the class. You can you can only fake it for so long, Googling everything.
Yeah.
And of course, as you mentioned, that's been a real concern. Artificial intelligence forming its way into, especially the English department, which in my experience is generally against it in the classroom altogether. But I've sort of seen both ends of it. So that's been the English end, totally against it. And then on the other end, in the business program, teachers in the business program have been largely in favor of it, really gung-ho on it, and the instructors actually contributed panels on artificial intelligence, now introducing a computer science class. Of course, a lot of people use it for different things now, ChatGPT, but the original use of it was for replicating computer code and sort of writing that. So it's interesting to see there, but I think oftentimes with people who defend it will say, they're like, oh, well, you can't fake it entirely. It's sort of in the same case. You at least have to have a base level knowledge to feed into it. So
yeah, and let's bring into the economic aspect of it. You know, it's one of those economic things that we have capitalism, we have free enterprise, and so if we restrict that, if the government steps in and says we're going to restrict AI. Now people are going to be in an uproar because you're restricting my freedom. So, you know, it's kind of like, I don't know if you remember the joke when we were talking about, at the end of the year, we did a little bit about economics and stuff, and I made the joke that we all want capitalism until we need the government, right?
Yeah.
We want our freedom to buy and sell things until we need help.
Absolutely.
And then we cry to the government.
That's a great point, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, but that's actually something we've covered specifically on this podcast. Jake and I have done a lot of back and forth on that. He's often said on this podcast in our artificial intelligence series, he doesn't think the public should even have access to it. He thinks that it should be heavily regulated. I wouldn't say that, and we should maybe use it cautiously. But there's a great deal of area for innovation in that, and I wouldn't say that it should be restricted a great deal. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I just, well, I'll go back to email. You guys don't remember this, you're way too young. But I remember when email became a thing. And there was a lot of concern about that. You know, it was new for everybody. It was, you know, immediate, you know, interaction. And there was some talk about, you know, how's the government going to regulate this? You know, how's the government going to protect my 12-year-old daughter from some guy sending her a bad image? You know, that's an example. You know, we need some sort of protection here. And then on the other side, people are like, no, free enterprise. You know, we don't want the government in it. And I do remember there was some talk about the government was going to take over email and run it through the Postal Service.
Right.
There was some talk about that, and you know, then it was going to cost you to send an email. I mean, you know, there'd be like sending, you know, a postage letter.
Right.
You know, and so then people kind of backed off on that. So, you know, that's the example I can give you of that freedom versus regulation. You know,
right.
With our unique economy.
And we've talked about this a bit before. Of course, obviously, you're here today. You know that that's not how things ended up going. You don't access your email through the United States Postal Service. You can access it through a number of different email providers that you can access it are widely available on the internet, be it Gmail, Yahoo Mail, America Online, famously said, "You've got mail," entire movie centering around that. Major thing there, but you have to think how things might have looked a bit differently. Of course, in terms of the United States Postal Service, I recall recently, of course, I was in your class senior year before graduating high school, and of course, after that, I received a lot of graduation gifts and sent out thank you cards, and I sent a thank you card to my grandparents who live in Nevada, and they received their thank you card a couple of weeks after I had actually sent it. And what's crazy is my great aunt and uncle who live in Florida, they received theirs first. So I sent my grandparents in Nevada, I sent theirs first, and it went through Kansas City, and apparently was bottlenecked something horrible in Kansas City. Actually went into the post office and asked about it, and so that's what they found. But the card that I sent after that to Florida, it actually arrived there first. Which is crazy. So I don't know about you folks out there. Feel free to chime in the comments below this video. But thankful that email seems to be somewhat more efficient than snail mail, as they call it, the United States Postal Service.
I don't know. I think the Postal Service is still pretty efficient.
Right.
It had that.
When you consider the volume that they
right. Well, it is a very wide scope, naturally, but it's just things like that, and could be done more efficiently. And I don't know. It was roughly a couple of weeks that it took that postcard to, but I recall my grandpa saying that he was going to buy a pony and start competing with the Postal Service.
So again, please put any comments or questions that you have down below about that, and we'll make sure to answer that. But that is all the time that we have for this portion of the Civics Spectacular.
Absolutely. So I believe next we're going to look at a little bit about the Missouri Boys State program, where both you and I attended, and of course the Missouri Boys State program, which of course is put on by the American Legion. They call themselves a simulation of civic life. So that's a particular relevance to the GWP Civics Spectacular. And
that's what we're going to be covering next Tuesday night. So make sure to join us for that.
Right, absolutely. You'll want to stay tuned for that. Don't miss it. But I do believe that is all we have for now. So,
yes.
until next time.
We will see you then.